both now and ever, and unto ages of ages. Amen.
I think almost everyone here probably knows who I am. I'll just introduce myself. My name is Michael Bachlig, and I'm president of the Antiochian Men for our diocese, the Diocese of Miami in the Southeast. I've had the massive blessing of working with Father Hans for more than 3 years now, and I've learned a lot from Father Hans over those years, and a lot from the men that I've worked with in my local parish and across the diocese. What we're going to do in this workshop, we're going to build off of what we just heard from Father Hans. Okay, our calling is to rebuild the culture. Before we can do that, we obviously have to focus on ourselves, working on ourselves, purifying our own souls and our own hearts, and we have to understand ourselves. This is something that I took. It was based on something I actually went through at work, and I have created a version of this that I think will help us to get to where we need to go. It's a reflection activity. I'm just going to read off of the sheet here. This reflection activity is designed to help you understand yourself better so you can articulate your needs, values, and preferences to others. Please feel free to be as open as you are able here. You will only be asked to share what you feel comfortable sharing today. So the instructions are: recall key points in your personal and work life that shaped who you are today. Consider obstacles, milestones, achievements, words of wisdom passed down to you, and expectations placed upon you. Now, you can use the back of this sheet if you would like, but really you don't have to write a novel. Just write, a sentence or two for each of these sections, and use the space provided around each of those little bubbles there. Which ones helped you move forward and make progress? And we're talking about your experiences in life. Some of you have had many experiences. Maybe some of our younger men in the room haven't had as many, but we've all had experiences. So which ones of those experiences helped you move forward and make progress in each of these areas? And then which experiences set you back in some of these areas? And then which influenced your preferences and your expectations? So you'll see in those little bubbles there, we're talking, I'll actually start at the bottom, family, and then going left, if we're going clockwise, education, friends in your life, your faith, your experience with work, or if you're a student, you can include school or just work in general. And then health. So for each of these areas, just jot down some thoughts from your experiences in life and what those experiences did either help you to move forward and to make progress in each of these areas, and then maybe some that set you back. So I'll give you guys just a few minutes to reflect on it. Yes, Peter?
Is the guideline or the plumb line our discussions we've been having in relation to that? How do these things influence this particular thing?
Just what shaped you in your life.
Just general.
Generally,
Cool.
yeah. I'll still give you all a couple of minutes. One other thing I'll ask you to do is to rank each of these circles, with number 1 being where you feel you are the strongest, or what part of your life you feel that you have the most together. This may take additional reflection. And just rank these 1 through 6. So put a number 6 next to the one where you feel that you need the most help in your life.
Is the ranking again, Michael?
Yeah, put a 1 where you feel that you have things the most together or where you're strongest in your life. And put a 6 where you need the most help, where you feel that you're either weakest or you don't have as much focus towards that part of your life and really need help from others, from God. So 1 through 6. It is not an exact science. I know in the middle there may be some that are close. Do your best to just rank number 1 as your strongest and 6 where you need the most help. If someone here puts a 1 next to all 6, I want to talk to that person because I'm sure I can learn a lot. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this workshop after the first talk is that Father Hans and I have been doing this for a while now, and we don't ever really have a part of these retreats to reflect in the middle of it. A lot of times we're just taking in so much, and it's a lot to chew on, and it isn't until maybe day 2 or 3 that we get to reflect on the events of the first day. A forced reflection, I think, is good in this case because we really have a big job ahead of us as men if we're going to rebuild the culture. And it can be done. It will be done. And we have to be the ones to do it. The title of this workshop is Deeper Manhood Begins with Ourselves. And I think we all realize that all of us are different. On our sheets in front of us, you've all written down notes based on your experiences of why you are who you are today. What has helped to shape who you are? So all of you are unique. That uniqueness is beautiful. The uniqueness and the diversity is necessary because we all need each other. God created us with different talents, with different distinctive personal gifts, with personality traits, so that we would need to rely on each other, not so that we can be individuals doing our own things. Having said that, we're all different. We have different strengths. We have different areas of our life where we can learn and need help. All of these areas of life are under attack. Okay, the predominant energy in the culture, the dominant culture that surrounds us today in the world, it's a disintegrative force. It is operating to disintegrate all of these things in our lives. So not only are we coming under attack with our own distinctiveness, right? We're being told that we're individuals, we're being pulled away from each other, but what we believe is family has been under attack for decades. Look at how family has been defined by the culture and how family has been attacked. Father Hans talked about feminism, really second-wave feminism in the 60s, working to rip apart the family unit, to attack women with the idea they don't need a child, they don't need a husband. They really shouldn't have those things if they want to be successful. Okay, the nuclear family, which is really a Western concept, the family used to be the village, the extended family. So in the West, what was left of what family was, the nuclear family, was then fully under attack in the 60s, and now we've gotten to where we are today. It's no wonder there's so much confusion about even what it means to be a man or a woman. The first battlefield really was the family. So this disintegration of the family is something that we are facing every single day in the culture. Education, do I really need to say what we're facing with education at large? Now, some of you are older, and maybe education for you think is just a school experience that was a long time ago. We're always learning. We're supposed to always be learning. Our catechism never ends. It's an ongoing experience. For me, I've been probably learning some of the most incredible things in the last few years of my life recently. But our education system, if you look at how we have institutionalized education from a secular standpoint, look at what's happening to our education system right now. And the uproar that in some circles is getting louder and louder about the priorities that are being pushed in education. But I also want you to think about your own experience in education, which may have been at a very different time. Just like I was talking about with family, I grew up in the 80s. I'm 41 years old. My experience of family was very different than those who are growing up right now, of what it means to be in a family. So you have to think about this in context. One of the things Father Hans has said is that we all assume the world is and has always been the way that it is in the age in which we were brought up, into the age in which we were born. People that are being born today are entering a very different world than I did in the 80s. Some of you were born before the 80s. It was even different then. I know I watch movies and TV shows from the 50s, and it's like a completely different world from the TV shows of today. I mean, that's a sign of how different the culture has changed. Let's keep going up the list. Friendships. Okay, I haven't even mentioned COVID, but think about how friendships have now changed, okay, and how friendships are being disintegrated. Our faith, just faith in general, not even our faith. This used to be a very solid, strong culture with Christian values. We hear post-Christian all the time, right? So faith is under heavy assault and disintegration. That's the attack. Our work lives. I'm in corporate America, and I can tell you that the corporate environment today is very different from just a few years ago. The priorities, the things that are entering into the workplace, it's scary. It's scary just how many things are entering in where people are feeling compelled to stay silent or compelled to speak about things that they don't agree with. And then health. Now, I didn't say COVID for a reason, because health is a much broader thing here. You know, we did a podcast recording here during the fall retreat a few weeks ago, and there were some incredible comments about talking about how, I think Ben Boatman was the one that said, actually. Ben, are you here? Where are you at?
Right in front of you.
There you are. I was looking further back. You talked about how you can eat whatever you want because there's, you know, if you have diabetes, you get an insulin shot, right? There's a pill now for almost everything. There's a medical antidote for any of these overindulgences that we're doing for living our life. Think about health now when it comes to our children. In some cases, children are being given puberty blockers because of this idea of transgenderism. I mean, kids aren't even really fully aware of their own bodies, and they're being told, you may want to transition to the opposite sex, to a different gender. This is becoming the norm now. It's really terrifying. Now, I want you guys to look at your paper and what you wrote down. And look at these things that you've written down that have been formative for yourselves. Okay? Now, by show of hands, I'm just going to do this quickly. Who put a 1 next to family? Okay, guys, look around at who has their hand raised, especially if you put a 6 next to family. Okay, because these could be your mentors. Okay, lower your hands. Raise your hand if you put a 1 next to education. Okay, a couple hands up. Guys, take notice of who's raising their hand for education, especially if you put a 6 next to education. All right, how about friends? Who put 1 next to friends? Okay, this is interesting. We're getting a couple from each circle. Okay, now how about faith? Who put a 1 next to faith? Okay, we've got a few hands. Take notice. Keep those hands up for a second. Look at who's raised their hand for their faith being the strongest, most put together aspect of their life. Okay, 2 more. The next one is work. Who put a 1 next to work? Anybody? Okay, that's where I would have put my hand up.
Me too.
Okay, so Father Hans and I work. Yeah. Isn't that interesting? You and I are the ones that would have picked work. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe this is a good workshop. Yeah. Okay, health. Who put a 1 next to health? Okay, look around, guys. There's a couple of guys now that have health. I'm not going to ask you guys to raise your hand for your 6s. But if you put a 5 or a 6 next to any of these categories, there's somebody in the room here who would put a 1. Okay, that's how we find who we can learn from. And it usually is someone older, but it doesn't have to be. I'll tell you, I've learned a lot from these young men that are coming in that are in their 20s. Some of them are so far beyond where I was at their age. You don't want to know what I was doing in my early 20s. They don't either. It blows my mind. These young men that are coming in, we were just talking about this. I think Dexter was saying they're so well educated. Okay, these are a really heady bunch. These are the early adopters that we're seeing coming to the church. Some of you are in this room. That's a good thing. But this is really a precursor to a much bigger flood that Father Hans is talking about is coming. The floodgates are going to open in the next few years, I would say. And we have to be ready for it. Now, all of these circles are separated from each other, but the goal is they should all be pulled into, do you see that sphere right there? Okay, that's the spiritual life. When I took this as a work seminar, they didn't call it the spiritual life. But I'm here to sanctify this sheet and to tell you that that's the spiritual life. It's pulling everything into that one center of focus. That sphere should be our life. That's the goal, is that we pull all of these together so that there's no difference between who we are at work or with our faith or education at school or with our family or when we go to the gym and we're working out. The goal is these need to be pulled in together so that it is one spiritual life. Just because we're at work doesn't mean that we can't live the faith. Okay? Now, all of you I know have put a 1 next to where you feel that you're the most stable. Okay? But none of us are perfect, and we all need help. We all come to the church with our own brokenness. Some of us are born into the church and can't avoid the brokenness that will happen throughout our lives because of the crazy culture that we are in. This is what the Antiochian men is built for, is to pull all of these things together into one spiritual life in the context of brotherhood. And we're going to talk about brotherhood in the next session. But before we can understand what an authentic brotherhood is, we have to understand ourselves and where we may need some help. And guys, it is not a bad thing to recognize that we need some help. I know the culture wants us to project an image of strength in all cases. But the only person that presumes that he's an expert in every aspect of life is a fool. And we can't be fools. We're called to be strong men. To be strong, we have to be vulnerable, which takes courage. Vulnerability, when you consider it in a masculine sense, involves courage. And courage is a virtue. A masculine virtue that is under attack. We're being told it's not okay to be courageous, that can be toxic. Each of these areas of life, for us as men, require real masculine virtues. And Father Hans just touched on this in his talk. At the end of his talk, he talked about we have to embrace virtue. The masculine virtues, courage, valor, sacrifice, assertiveness, these are being mocked and minimized in our culture every single day. When I said that the work environment has changed, you'd be surprised just how many men are afraid to speak up. That are actually just sitting on their hands or just taking a seat when they're supposed to be standing up. The last thing I'll ask you to do before I ask Father Hans to come up here and talk about this sheet and how it may apply to each of you at the personal level before we can move on to brotherhood. I want you to write one or two of the virtues required for your own personal lives to strengthen each of these sections, each of these categories. What one or two virtues would you put next to health, next to work, in the context of today's culture and society? Same thing for faith, friends, education, and family. What are those virtues that you think are most important or that you should start to incorporate?
So the strength of the brotherhood is actually, Michael touched on this, is going to be in your interrelationship with each other, where one man's strength makes up for another man's weakness, okay? And Michael talked about the vulnerability part. That's a difficult word. But I'm going to tell you that the vulnerability part is actually what it is it's a brotherhood. You depend on this brother to do this, you depend on that brother to do that. I built that up in my parish, I'm building it up. And there's some guys who are really good at some stuff, and they're my go-to guys. And I have no problem in my parish either. You know, I know what I know, and I know what I don't know. And there's people in my parish who know a lot more about this thing or that thing than I do. And I go right to them. I go right to them. I say, tell me what to do. Could you do this, this, and that? The remarkable thing about that is when you can develop that, and you develop that among brothers, there's humility that is fostered. Humility is that it is fostered, and in that humility, vision is clarified. So with the men of my parish, I tell them all the time, and especially the older guys, some of us older guys are here, right? We're working for the next generation. We are not working for ourselves. And, you know, I talk about, okay, the structure of the soul and this and that. When you get older, and when you get 50s, guys, listen to this. I heard this when I was young. I said, when you get 50s, you realize, I heard this like I was in my 20s and I remembered it. When you're 50, you begin to realize that life is finite. That's exactly what happened when I reached 50. I began to realize that, I'm not going to live forever. That life has a limit. But what that does, then, you start valuing life more. And the older you get, you realize that every day is a gift and you don't want to waste it. You just don't want to waste it. And that's one of the gifts of like getting older and understanding this. And I just read a study I came across that said, you know, the most creative years decades of your life are your 60s and your 70s. I didn't know that. But a man like at 50, you kind of got a lot of your stuff worked out. Okay? And then the creativity can really start at that point. So I'm speaking to the older guys here, and your creativity here is mentoring, Because some of you guys have got this part figured out. Okay, you got the work thing figured out, I got the work thing figured out. You know, the faith thing, I mean, life has a particular order, and you've discovered what that order is, and you've developed things within that particular order, and you've learned a few things along the way. Michael said that the young guys now are ahead of when he was in his 20s, and that's my situation too. It took me a long time to figure out what the path was because I didn't have a teacher. I just didn't have a teacher. I had to learn all this stuff myself. And it took a long time to learn it, right? And now these guys that I mentor, they learn it a lot faster. And I'm surprised at, where they're at 26 and 27. It's because they have the humility to listen, number one. And so they apply. And I'm thinking, you guys are blessed. You guys are blessed because there's something in place where you can avoid a lot of the pitfalls. And I don't mean just the sins. I'm just talking about the sheer not knowing. If you have to learn things on your own, it takes a whole lot longer to learn them. It does. And you can cut off years. You can cut off years if you have a teacher or a mentor and you listen to them. And men, those of you who know this, and I don't know if you're mentoring anyone yet, but for you, the reward of the mentoring is just huge. Nothing will give you more joy. Nothing gives you more joy. And it's God, see, it's God. The mentoring is like a spiritual fatherhood. Like you become responsible for somebody who's younger than you are to teach him this or teach him that. In the old days, it was apprenticeship. It was called an apprenticeship. And this is an apprenticeship of life. But the reward of the master builder, the reward of the mentor, the joy and the satisfaction you receive from this is just absolutely immeasurable because it replicates the work of Christ is what it does in another person's life. The guy being mentored, if you want to be mentored and you want somebody to help you along, which is to say give you the information that you need and give you insight that it might take you 2 or 3 years to get for yourself and give it to you now, you are going to zoom ahead and your progress is going to be faster and you're going to feel the gratification that I touched on in the former talk about work well done. About work well done. Because we're created to create. The very first thing that the Lord reveals to us in Holy Scripture is that He is creator. In the beginning, God created. It's the first thing we know about God, first revelation that is made. We are to be co-creators with Christ, that co-creation with Christ, which means that the work of our hands have a transcendent character and purpose to them, brings great gratification to your own soul as well. It fulfills you as man because man is creator. So these things, and Michael already said it, I'm just kind of elaborating on what he said, but these things are really important constituents and components of our lives. Teach each other. Go to a man who gets this and say, could you help me with this? Or if you're older and you see a guy struggling, you approach him. I do that a lot of times because just to break the ice, I said, consider this, right? And I'll just say it. And if the guy considers it, then very often a really good and strong relationship ends up developing. It's a really deep relationship. It's father-son thing. And it's just absolutely beautiful. This is what the character of men can become. And in becoming like this, man, I'm telling you, the explosion of creativity that results, the creativity that's unleashed, it will build many beautiful things and straighten out many men's lives.
Thank you, Father Hans. I want to now pose a question to you guys. Take a look at your sheet and think about all these different aspects of your life. Now think about all of the young men that are coming to the church right now. And I've even heard in this parish, there's a lot of young men coming in. A lot of them have a deformed idea of what this means. Father Hans was mentioning the Lord of Spirits podcast, and Father Stephen DeYoung is one of the co-hosts, and he recently talked about, a lot of the younger generation's formative experiences are going to look a lot different than what you just wrote. They're disembodied experiences. So much has become virtual. COVID accelerated this, of course, but things are becoming very individualized, less personal, more individual, and we're being disconnected from each other. So what's happening to these bubbles is that some of them are starting to burst for a lot of the young men out there. Even if this is not true for you personally, you have to understand where these men are coming from. All of these areas of life are under such intense attack right now. And Father Hans talked about also, a lot of these young men have not experienced real love from their father. How can they experience the love of God the Father when they haven't experienced the love of their biological father here on earth? They're coming from broken homes. Divorce is becoming more common. Or absent fathers that are just checked out. One or more of these bubbles can burst. And a lot of the men that are coming to the church right now, and I've talked to a lot of them, one-on-one, over coffee, I do this multiple times a week. These bubbles are either deformed, haven't been able to fully develop, or they've burst. And men have a very difficult time showing the pain. The pain is in there. They may be under a form of lockdown, where they don't want to let anybody know where they're vulnerable. They don't want to let people know that they don't have a fully developed bubble that is an important aspect of life. Okay, so what we have to do as men, and I'm coming to you as a layperson, I'm not a priest, obviously. We have to pay very close attention to when men are hurting, because it's not going to be immediately obvious. When you get to know somebody and they tell you their story, usually they're going to key in on one or two very important aspects of their experiences. Now, these are all formative experiences that you've written down. Some of them are very healthy, I'm sure. Some of them may have also not been the best. They may have not been healthy. That may be where you need to lean on somebody else. We have to encourage each other to do this. We cannot shut off from other people and think that we within ourselves have the power to overcome a deformed sense of friendship or family. I'll tell you, in my case, I had more than one of these bubbles burst in my life, and I'm a cradle Orthodox Christian. That's what drove me to want it for myself, to want healing. And this is where we're going to experience healing. All of us in the room and those who we have yet to meet that are coming to the church. When we talk about brotherhood, and I know we're going to be talking about this next, we have to be aware of where we are strong, where we have experiences, and what we can do with that experience to come along somebody else who may have one or more burst bubbles in their life. Okay? These are the men who value authenticity. And this is what's been happening in my local parish. I'll just share with you that before COVID, we had an average attendance of 62, 61 people. Okay? That was before COVID hit in 2020. All right, now we're at 95. Okay? And we had 112 at liturgy last Sunday for just a regular Sunday. The majority of our new members are young adults, and almost all of them are young men. Now, why is that? It's not because of anything I've done by myself alone. We have a very healthy brotherhood of men who have identified areas of our lives where we maybe can impart wisdom and healthy experiences and plug these guys into somebody that can help point them in the right direction. This is not being a spiritual father. This is being a spiritual brother. There's a difference. And it's important that we know that. We're not here to be the priest, unless you're a priest in the room. Forgive me, Father. But our priests need help. They can't do it all. They're not supposed to, actually, they're not supposed to do it all. I grew up in the church and I actually thought, oh, the priest is just supposed to do it all. He's a priest. That's not realistic. The priest can't be everywhere at all times. Okay? The laity has a role to help the priest by coming alongside and to be a guide for those who are in need of being guided. In some cases, we're going to guide them right to the priest, especially if it's a spiritual matter that needs addressing. But a lot of times the priest won't know about it, and we have to help in that way. And we can just be there to listen and to be present. Another thing that came up in the podcast recording that I talked about is just how much value there is, and forgive me, Ben, you might have been the one that said this, in just being there and listening. We don't have to always be talking. I think it was you that said that. I struggle with the same thing. I'm up here talking. I love talking. And I talk too much. My wife will tell you I talk way too much. And sometimes we just need to be present. There was a question asked, it might have been Eric that asked this, about having the right answers and pushing back against a lot of these lies that are in the culture. And there's a place for that. But, you know, a lot of times people who are struggling with the confusion, they just need somebody to be there for them. And they don't necessarily need the right answer in that moment. They just want a brother to be there for them. And it's becoming harder and harder in the culture today because with the disintegrating energy that is trying to pull us apart from each other, we're no longer comfortable with relating to each other in a loving friendship, brother to brother. That's what we have to take back. In my local parish, where we have a very strong and healthy brotherhood, the love that is experienced in that brotherhood means that when someone new is introduced to it, they're blown away. They have never experienced love, truly. And when they experience it, like Father said earlier, they take a step back. They're almost in shock. They're so used to being taken advantage of or having a sensation of pain when love was attempted that they kind of recoil from it initially, but eventually there's this yearning to come back and back. And I'm telling you, this is why our parish is growing. And I'm sure in this parish, a well-established church that's been here for many years and has incredible resources, if you can capture that same environment of brotherly love, okay, these men that are coming in our doors are not going to want to leave. They're going to want to plug in. They're going to want to learn. And ultimately, and this is why I did this, they're going to want their bubbles healed. All of us have damage. We have brokenness in our past with our experiences. And I'm here to tell you the younger generations are having a much, much harder time. Much harder time with these bubbles, and they're bursting left and right. And where they're rushing to try to find healing is usually the wrong place, and we have to be the alternative to that because they're seeking out ideologies that is just drinking sand. You're not drinking the life-giving water of Christ. When you do come into a healthy brotherhood in the context of the church with our understanding of anthropology, the whole anthropology of Christ, of manhood, of what it means to be a man, when you apply the orthodox anthropology of man, it is an answer to every question a man could ever have. Instead of rushing to try to seek out where these people are, we have to work on ourselves first. Once we stabilize ourselves, the Lord will bring men into our lives, and He will not trust us with them until we have stabilized ourselves. And I know this from experience. If we're not stabilized, our whole family can fall apart. I told you more than one of my bubbles burst. My family bubble completely burst because I was not stable. Once I put in the work of stabilizing myself and my family and strengthened that bubble, God started putting people in my life where I could be a positive influence for that man, to learn about fatherhood, to learn from my failures. Here's what not to do. And I know what not to do. And let me tell you how I went wrong. You'd be surprised how healing that is to somebody who has just gone through a divorce when he never thought he would ever be divorced. To hear somebody say, I've been divorced. I failed. But I've also learned from that. And I've risen from the ashes, as each of us has the capability of doing by the grace of God, with His help, if we truly approach our life fully integrated, where these bubbles get pulled into one sphere. And we're going to talk about how we do that a little bit more tomorrow, and especially in the next session. But I want you guys to know that the main driver behind why the church is growing and why so many men are coming to the Orthodox Church is because we have all the answers they're looking for. It's in our Orthodox anthropology. It's exactly what Father Hans has been talking about. And each one of you, as he has said, has a calling. We're all called to do this. I heard him say that 3 years ago, and I have seen the results of actually applying this stuff, of actually looking inward at myself and then ultimately upward to God. because that's the healing that we all need, and it's the healing that people are searching for. They're not going to find it outside the Orthodox Church, guys. I've talked to dozens of men who have been searching and church hopping and going from church to church. I mean, trying Buddhism, trying paganism, and it's just not working. It keeps leading them to nihilism. The only alternative is orthodoxy. We're the last line of defense. There's nowhere else for them to go because they've looked. They've told me this. They have spent years looking for the truth, looking for Christ. They don't always know that. But once they find it, it's always in a healthy community of brothers. And I'm talking about these young men that Father Hans has been working with for over a decade, and that I found myself now working with. The joy that you're going to get by coming alongside another man who is hurting is going to be more than enough to sustain you. The joy of the Lord is my strength. It is your strength. When you think, oh, there's no way that I could possibly help someone who's lost all their friends. I was there once. Or who has had their family fall apart. I was there once. Or who dropped out of school and didn't finish college and thinks he's never going to go back. I was there once. I did end up going back, and I did finish college. Who has started gaining 20, 30, 50 pounds and has completely lost control of their health. You know, guys, usually when one bubble breaks, another one is soon after that going to break. And one of the other things I mentioned in that podcast recording that I just referred to a few weeks ago, a lot of these guys out there, they're searching for God in the wrong place, and at some point, they're going to experience a crisis moment. It could be 3 or 4 of these bubbles bursting at the same time. It doesn't have to happen. They don't have to experience that. In some cases, that's the wake-up call, right? That's the wake-up call that I needed, unfortunately. I was very stubborn, and I needed something big, but it doesn't have to end that way. We can preempt that crisis moment by just being there for them as a brother. Eric, you had a question?
I did, and this kind of touches on one of the things that Father Hans kind of closed with, comment made, is that when things get tough, we want to go to the comforts of sensuality. And I would say another way, when some of these bubbles burst or getting risk of bursting, you know, we want to go to the comforts of that sensuality. And when I think of sensuality, the first thing I think of is women, sex, but I think that's bigger than that. And that's my question. What does comforts of sensuality mean? What are examples of that in a way?
I'm going to have Father Hans come up after I respond to it from my point of view. And I'll tell you that this is something I've learned from Father Hans, from His Grace Bishop Nicholas. St. Maximus the Confessor talks about the motivation behind all desire, even inordinate desire, is the desire for God. So if you think about in the sensuality point is a key topic for men. And a lot of young men struggle with this, now even older men. Adolescence is being stretched out further and further so that, I mean, young men are really just boys in a lot of cases. If they haven't come to the church yet, they're living in a perpetual state of adolescence. The sensuality is the attempt to capture the love of God. And what is happening is, if you think about the sexual drive, and this is from obviously the point of view of a man. So a man's sexual drive was actually a gift given to us from God. The sexual drive in itself is not evil, right? Because the sexual drive was given to us by God for the creation of new life, to engage in ordered, proper marital relations with our wives to bring about new life. And it's a powerful force because it's unitive. It brings together body, mind, and soul. But it's the soul part where we get into trouble. I've learned all this from Father Hans. I've studied intensely what he has learned because he's been doing this for over a decade, working with young men. What we do is we confuse eros with eroticism. So we, men, especially young men, in a confused and crazy culture where all of these bubbles are under full assault, where we run to the sensuality because we want to find wholeness. We want to find that unitive experience. So we confuse eros with eroticism and we use it as a drug. That's why Father Hans has said this so many times, pornography is from hell, and it is bad. It is not good at all. But the addiction isn't to pornography. The addiction is to masturbation. It's to self-abuse. Okay, so the eroticism being confused with eros is where many men are trying to find wholeness again, because these bubbles are bursting left and right, and we need to feel whole again. That's the perspective from a layman who has learned from Father Hans. And Father, I'll ask you to come up and complete that thought.
Okay. Look, in a secular world, when there's no transcendent reference, there's no touchstone, right? And so you're supposed to be self-sufficient. Okay, your soul does not get the gratification from God, because our soul is created to be gratified. We have desires. Our soul has desires, and those desires need gratification. That gratification, though, is really the concrete experience of the energy of God, the love of God, and the love of the brother. Okay, because they all work together. And when that is not being satisfied, the soul still has its desire, but then what we do is we direct the energy of the soul, the desire of the soul, into sensuality for the reason that Michael said. Because all you have left, if there's no God, all you have left is the sensation of your body. The strongest sensation, the strongest is sexual, because the sexual drive is unitive. It brings together body, soul, and mind. And so the sexual drive gets amplified. It gets amplified. This is one of the reasons why society is so sex-obsessed, right? Because it's really being driven by this desire for wholeness and connection. That's what's going on. And so this has been marketed to, I mean, this is a function of the sexual revolution of the 60s, right? And when the barriers were mocked and destroyed. I mean, consequently, there's only, back in the 60s and 70s, even 80s, there was only three types of STDs. But now they've multiplied and propagated. There's like 32 different kinds of STDs. All right? And I mean, it's really, it's a catastrophic calamity. What the breakdown of the sexual mores in society has caused, and young people suffer from it a lot, because again, they grow up thinking that this is normative, and it is in their world. But so we come into this, and then the young men are really trapped in this. So the thing about sexuality is primarily porn and self-abuse, but not only young men. All right, and the reason that porn is so prolific is because young men need it to, I'm going to shock some of you guys, masturbate more. Because masturbation is the only palliative to the anguish of the soul. Now what happens though, is that even that leads to a greater spiritual exhaustion. I mean, physically, you can only masturbate so much, but spiritually, your soul can only handle so much abuse. And so you will either deaden the soul more and get off into all sorts of crazy sexual stuff, or you will bring that exhaustion to God. Because you know that fundamentally you recognize fundamentally the search is a spiritual one. So how does the healing happen? The healing happens when you have to decouple the sexual drive from kind of the behavioral dysfunction, okay? And the way I do that is that, okay, so a guy is really struggling with this. People think it's porn, but it's really self-abuse. Okay, and I say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to separate the desire from the action, because for most guys, the desire and the action are just linked. I feel this way, so I'm going to do it, and we're going to start resisting. That's what Orthodox self-discipline, ascetic self-discipline says. We're going to start resisting. when you start resisting, what happens is space opens up between the desire and the action. I say, tell me what's happening in the space, right? And whatever comes up in that space, that's what needs to be healed. Because, and this is really how, this is the most diabolical thing. And I think that the people who market this stuff, who market it, okay, I think their judgment's going to be great. What happens is it begins in adolescence, even pre-adolescence now. I mean, I'm hearing that guys begin porn at 10, 11, 12, even before they sexually mature. It starts that young. I understand why it does, because there's the psychological and spiritual part of that too. And so they face the normal, they face the things that are kind of normal to childhood that boys have to face in order to become men. But because of the ubiquity of pornography and because of the absence of a father, those things are not overcome. And so the pain of failure and the sense of inadequacy that they have is ameliorated by the masturbation. So instead of experiencing that flush of gratification that a man feels when he accomplishes what he is supposed to do, what is necessary, somebody in the back needs in, what is necessary to become a fuller and more whole and complete man, he seeks it through the masturbation. Because the masturbation offers a false promise of fulfillment, of unification. See how that is? How that works? And then it becomes habituated, and it can become sometimes compulsive. So what I tell guys is this. I say, guys, God gave you your hands, but the only time, he gave you your hands to create things. The only time your hand should be touching your penis is when you're taking a leak or cleaning yourself in the shower. So that's it. Keep your hands away and use your hands to work, to create. Because the real fulfillment that you're looking for in this through the self-abuse is actually you're going to get it as you work, as you are creative in a masculine way. Okay? And this is the way that we have to approach the issue. And so let me raise the flag for orthodoxy here, because it's St. Maximus the Confessor. All desire, even inordinate desire, is a desire for God. So let's deal with it on the level of desire. Let's clean that up. Let's purify the soul. And there's a way that we can do this. And I've seen guys released from this, really released from this. And the self-discipline required to change the life and make it more productive is actually the gateway to masculine self-fulfillment and actualization. Because once they taste that gratification that comes through accomplishment, at that point, that's what lights the fire. Ooh, I love this. And they want more of it. Of course they do, because their soul is being fulfilled. And that's how a man finds his purpose in life. It really is the acquisition of virtue. And in this case, it's the virtue of self-control. And I tell these guys, I say, listen, if you learn how to master your own body, I said, you will master the world. That's exactly what happens. They define for themselves, number one, who they are, and what they were put on this earth to do. And they're released. It's a growth into manhood that I witness with my own eyes, and it's like a flower unfolding, or a tree, the leaves coming out on a tree. It's really quite remarkable. I contend that this can only occur in relationship and in communion with another man. This is an example of how healing occurs through brotherhood. And I'm telling you, a woman can't do it. A woman cannot listen to a man describe this and expect any kind of healing on the man. So I said, don't go to a woman therapist for this. Don't talk to a woman therapist about manly stuff. Talk to another man who understands it, because it's in the relationship that the energy flows, that the love flows, that brings the healing of the soul. So again, I raise the flag of orthodoxy because only orthodoxy understands that the release from these debilitating sins is through purification of the heart, the purification of desire. You know, the only other programs out there to defeat this say, well, watch your triggers. It's a form of behavior modification. But orthodoxy understands that the soul itself can be transfigured, and that transfiguration is the healing of the person. And we know how to do it. We just follow what the fathers teach us. We know how to do it. And this is also one of the reasons why, see, the men coming into the church, they natively understand this. They don't know that they don't understand it, but they're intuitively drawn to it. They feel a wholeness and a health, and there must be some kind of an answer. And that intuition is 100% correct. It is. And we are responding to that influx by focusing what the church really teaches, because it's necessary we respond in a focused way, but also by purifying our own lives and defining our own responsibility and ministry in more precise terms, because we sense in our own hearts, this is why you're here. We sense that calling for precisely that point and purpose, but I'm telling you, the point and purpose is so that as the Lord adds to the church, we can all grow as the body of Christ. And each one of you guys here are going to have to define for yourself what it is, what your particular area of service is going to be. And then you've got to man up to it. You've got to define it, you've got to man up to it, and you've got to do it, because it is necessary for all of us to do more and to do better, because the Lord requires of it. He requires that of us, because He's waiting so He can bring more people in. And it's not about numbers. It's about restoring the heart of man. It's about restoring and strengthening the church. Ecclesia, it comes from the Greek, the ones who are called out. We're called, men, we're called. And He's preparing us for the harvest that is coming. I can see it coming. The harvest that is coming, and He's preparing us now so we're ready when it comes. And it's also going to be about the restoration of the culture of this country we love as well. It's all those things. Now tell me if this isn't worth fighting for, and if this isn't worth living for. Tell me something greater than this. There's nothing. So we got to wake up, guys. We have to wake up, because we're the ones called. Think about that. We don't think about that. We kind of tend to think it's somebody else. No, I'm telling you, it is us. It is us. And isn't it just the best? Isn't it just the best? Want our lives to mean something? Well, here it is. The Lord's given it to us. I'm telling you this. I know this in the bottom of my heart. I see it every single day. I get calls every day, and I take those calls. And I get texts primarily, because I can't pick up the phone anymore when it rings. I don't have time. But I get texts, will you be my mentor? From these guys. And I answer, yes, I will. And I'm on the phone all the time. And I manage it well, but I can see we need more. We need more. So that's one of the reasons I'm here and doing this.
We're going to wrap this workshop up. We have lunch, I think, is happening soon, but I wanted to leave you all with one more thought. It's hard to follow what Father Hans just said. That's a tough one to follow. Very powerful words, and something that I have seen reign true for myself in my own life, in my parish, locally, in parishes throughout our diocese. I've had the huge blessing of being able to travel to, I would say, almost half now of the churches in our diocese and met with a lot of the men. There's one thing that is a common theme, though, that is preventing authentic brotherhoods from forming, and this is what we have to take back. We have to take back what it means to be a brother to someone else, because when we were talking about sensuality and the love that men were designed to pour into other men, this has been sexualized in our culture, and this is a huge barrier. This is a huge roadblock for authentic brotherhoods to form. There's a real stigma out there when we talk about the brotherly love that needs to exist between a man and another man. Father Hans was talking about you can't get it from women. Well, men, for the most part, are hesitant to explore what it means for a man to love another man in a brotherly context because it's been sexualized. And we live in a sex-crazed culture. And we have to stop hesitating. We have to stop worrying about being branded something. We have to take it back. And we can't wait. What are we going to wait for? The culture's collapsing all around us. It's only going to get worse if we don't take it seriously. So to experience the love of a man, as a man, does not mean that you bring it into a sexual experience. That's not the kind of love that St. Paul talks about when he talks about the love of the brethren. That was never intended to be a sexual innuendo. But these days it's becoming difficult for us to see brotherhood as authentic unless there's these sexual charge connotations that come along with it. We have to stop that. And that just is a very simple rejection of lies. So as we move on into the next session to talk about brotherhood, I want you all to be thinking about how we can take back this concept of authentic brotherhood to show men what it means to be loved as a brother, because that's what they're missing. Because the culture is telling them that it needs to be sexualized, and that's a lie. The real love that a brother experiences, man to man, is what the means by which Christ heals a lot of these bubbles that are bursting. My own healing is continuing, but really started through the context of an authentic brotherhood, when men came alongside me and showed me real love. And I think that's a good way for us to stop this. And Eric, are you in the kitchen? Are we ready for lunch?
I'll probably need about 10 minutes.
Okay.
To get everything set up.
So 10 minutes of Q&A, is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. Father Hans, would you mind joining me up here? If anyone has any questions about what we just discussed, and we covered a lot, I understand that. And it's a lot to process, but that's why we started with reflection. Perhaps over lunch you can reflect with each other, but does anyone have any questions for Father Hans or for myself?
Yeah, you mentioned how, and this is an example of like masturbation. It's really that there's a space that we can create between what we think we need and how we've been resolving those needs, incorrectly. So is it that space where we can ask ourselves, why am I going to masturbate? Why am I going to overeat? Why am I going to, do these things? Is that what you intended by that?
Yeah, exactly. Because what happens is when you start the resistance, okay, then what comes up is really the reason what you're trying to cover up with through the self-abuse.
So it might be, I'm lonely, I want to feel loved, and then we're turning to food or masturbation or video games instead of taking on a vocation where it's not just pixels that are kicking butt, but it's actually us in the real world. So so it's some sort of like a perverted response to a real need.
It's a disordered desire, is what it is. It's a desire that is disordered. It's going in the wrong direction. So what we have to do is figure out, okay, where did this start? It usually started somewhere in adolescence. Okay?
Or even earlier, perhaps. You know.
It could have been earlier. I mean, with sexual stuff, for a man, it usually has to do with feelings of inadequacy, being inadequate in some way or another. All right, and that's hard for a guy to confess to another guy. But what I will do sometimes, I'll just take the sting away and I'll just ask, do you feel like, and he can say yes, right? But once it's confessed, then, you know, that sense of what he feels inadequate about can be healed. It can be healed. And part of the resistance and that healing, it goes together. It goes together. I mean, I've seen guys who have really, like I say, overcome. If there is a compulsion behind it, like even he wants to stop but he can't, then usually what it is that's rooted in trauma. And trauma is stored in the body. It's not in the mind. The mind stores the chronology of the event. Trauma is stored in the body, and your mind has a memory component. And actually, a lot of times, trauma can be dealt with through prayer. It's really quite remarkable how that healing happens, right? And so, and when the trauma element is healed up, then the sexual temptation falls under the umbrella of orthodox, ascetic self-discipline, and we handle it in that way.
I had something to add.
Okay.
One other thing to add too, it's a really good question because I've dealt with this and worked with, and asked Father Hans for his advice. One of the things he told me, a lot of these thoughts come to me, these sensual temptations late at night. And I asked Father Hans, I'll share with all of you, I asked, what can I do to start that resistance a little bit better? And he suggested go for a walk or go for a run, do something physical. I mean, masturbation is a physical act. So sometimes we need to replace the act with something else to flush it out of our system. And it can be, I think, helpful to focus whatever that thought is and whatever that energy you want to release into something more productive. I mean, I know I could do a better job of being in shape, right? So if you replace that sinful act with something that is good, with something that's holy, with putting that energy into something good, the demons have a lot harder time getting you to give into it habitually if you've focused it into something productive. And see, the resistance that Father Hans is talking about, when you start pushing back, it's not easy. The demons are going to let you know about it. They really don't want you to resist. It's that initial kind of hit that you have to get through. Once you've established a positive routine to replace the sinful act, that's where the transformation can begin. And I'll tell you just as a testimony from my own life, if you're consistent with it, and I'm not always consistent, I have been, for the times that I have been better at being consistent, the things that I used to enjoy that were sinful are not fun anymore. I don't even think about them. That's what transformation looks like. Yeah. Because you've retrained your brain with your body to pour it into something productive and something holy, which if it replaces that sinful act, the things you used to think were fun, they're not even on the radar anymore.
Yeah, and you see, the goal isn't to stop masturbation. The goal is to become a full human being. Mm-hmm. And masturbation is is preventing that, okay? Because you're dissipating a lot of your masculine creative energy through masturbation. So, like I say, the goal is not to stop masturbating. The goal is to become more whole. That's what it is, and that's what becomes the reward. Because you will feel more whole. In fact, what happens is, when a guy starts resisting, he will feel this creative urge, this creative power well up, which he used to dissipate out through masturbation. So that has to be directed into something. And that what has to be directed into is creative work. But if that is directed into creative work, that sense then of fulfillment that he's looking for through masturbation, right, is actually given to him. And again, that's what awakens the nous. And part of that awakening is deeper self-knowledge. And it's great to have self-knowledge. It's great to know yourself. It really is. So, I mean, we're talking about this a lot, but it's a big issue. It comes up all the time. And one thing I want to say is what I've learned is that no one desires a man's healing more than God in this area. He knows what the evil one is doing, and he knows what the propaganda is. So when you help a man become a man, all right, the angels in heaven, they rejoice, and God is really on the side of the man who's struggling. I see that. I just see it. And the reward that is given to him for resisting and trying to overcome this is great. It's really great, because the Lord wants him to overcome.
Eric, do we have time for one more quick question?
Yes, and I have a question too, so.
Oh, go ahead.
Time for two.
We'll do two.
So, one question that popped up into my mind with the self-evaluation thing is, with self-evaluation in the Orthodox pronema, is I'm thinking like perhaps like maybe our goal, because God is on the side who struggles of those who struggle the most, maybe our goal is to have them all at 6s, but not in the wrong way, but the right way, as in like we're in our humility and our poorness of spirit, perhaps like that's what really sets things into order, like instead of us assuming that we're all ones, we've arrived somewhere.
Yeah, I think the goal is that the brotherhood will form so that collectively you're all at 6s together, right? Because in some ways you may have a 3 being paired up with a 1, but then there's another 1, and those become a 2. Okay, so like the idea is, if we think we're going to be a 6 for every bubble, we're delusional. Okay, it's not realistic.
Are you talking about a 1 or a 6?
I mean a 1. I'm sorry. I went backwards. Good catch. I was testing you. Good job. No, the idea is that we're not at a 1. I was playing the other kind of stratego where they'd flip the numbers. No, the idea is that we wouldn't be at a 1 individually. Okay, so we need to lean on our brothers so collectively we can be at 1s across the board. I said that wrong. Thank you. So to think that we're going to be able to reach a 1 in every circle and to sustain that, right? That's like thinking that there's no ladder of divine ascent and that we can't fall off if we reach the top rung. Okay? We can be pulled down at any time, so we have to rely on our brothers. We have to. We have to realize that we're not perfect. But we can be collectively strong. So men were designed by God to be strong, but we were meant to be strong together. Okay, that's the message, and that's the reason for why I brought this out. Okay, so forgive me for saying 6s. I meant if you think that you're going to be a 1 for every bubble and sustain that for the rest of your life, you can't do that by yourself. I mean, individually, we can't do that. I mean, we cannot defeat the devil one-on-one because the devil's attacking every circle constantly. We need to lean into the church, into brotherhood, to be able to rise up to defeat the devil. Really, it's Christ who's defeated the devil, but we still have an active role to play in spiritual warfare. Eric, did you say you had a question?
I did, and I've had some experience here, so I know, I think some of the some of the answer, but I'd like to hear it from Father Hans. And this kind of is in the vein of, so what do I get out of it? Okay, theme. And that is, you know, what are some of the examples of the spiritual benefits that we can get by mentoring or sponsoring and being that spiritual brother? Oh, no, by doing that action, by mentoring or sponsoring someone younger than us, what does that give us? Right? What is that? How does that improve? How does that help our journey, our theosis?
Well, there's two answers to that. The first is the deepest joy. I mean, it's just so good. And the joy of the Lord is your strength. It is just so good and so meaningful. I'm not sure I could experience something like that in any other thing that I do. And I get to do some pretty cool stuff. But it's when I see a guy overcome and a guy grow, I mean, I'm like a proud dad. And I tell him, I'm just proud. I said, I'm like a proud father. And they love that. And I love it, right? So that's number one. And number two is, how did I learn this stuff? Like about masturbation and all that. Everybody is wowed when they hear it. And the truth is, you know, not many people are saying it. But how did I learn this stuff? God, in His goodness, gives me insight in how to deal with it. And I just learned, in a sense, by doing. So what do we get out of it? We get knowledge out of it that ends up helping other people as well. So,
And we're saved in the process.
And we're saved in the process. That's what it is. So, you know, what this has done for me, too, nobody's ever asked me this, but what this has done for me, too, is shown me how great the mercy of God really is, because I see it working in their lives. And that like has really deepened my own knowledge of who God is, and I think it's deepened my faith a lot, because I see Him acting in the lives of others, and I see His goodness in a way I just had never seen or was even temperamentally able to accept. End of story, right? But now I count on it, because I love these guys who come into my life. I count on it, and because I see it, it's deepened my own relationship with the Lord, the communion with the Lord, and I think I'm a better man and a deeper man for it. So I'm just reiterating what Michael just said. We're saved ourselves in the same way that we help save others.
Yeah, let me add something quick. The other thing, too, I would add is what Father's saying is so true, and it resonates in me, because as I've been able to serve others, really I've been able to find God by serving and loving others. Yeah. We're designed to be a conduit through which the divine energies of God and God's love can be poured through. And when you see the look in someone's face who you've ministered to, and I could give 100 different examples of the way that you can do that, you really see God. You see what the love of God can do for someone, which fills you with joy that makes you want to do nothing but that, and it puts you in tune with who you are as a man. You find yourself, you find God. If you find God, you're going to find yourself. If you really find yourself, you find God, and it's through your service to someone. So what we get out of it is the opportunity to know God and to know the love of God. And that is in itself, it's like putting nitrous oxide into transformation. It just takes it up another level. And when you experience that, all these things we talk about in the church, it's no longer up here. When you experience, it's a lived experience. It hits you in the heart. That's when you know it's real. It's not learning all of the apologetics, and it's not learning the theology. It's important to know that. But when you actually see the love of God affecting another human being that you are ministering to, and you see God, you cannot put that into words, but it transforms you to a level that you won't be able to experience any other way. Yeah.
First of all, thanks for addressing this head to head.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of men's retreats and meetings and conferences that dance all around the issue, right? So thanks for does it take courage? Thanks for the...
Yeah, I am the same way with you, because when Father Hans first started talking about this, and I heard it 3 years ago, I said, thank you, God, for finally talking about what we've all just kind of not addressed as the elephant in the room, right?
And is there a way that Amen is offering a structure or an idea, or is this more organic? I'm thinking about like partnerships of 2 guys or 3 guys, and you're committed to texting each other throughout the week, and like Eric and I, wherever Eric's going, right? We became friends sitting here at a parish dinner, and it's just one text got it started.
Yeah.
And after that, it was like, how you doing today? Where are you going? Praying for your mom, thinking about you. I mean, and to me, that, I'm not alone anymore in that sense.
Yeah.
I see everybody on weekends, but just to know I'm on somebody's mind, and that, to me, that's brotherly love. Like, you're
right.
You know. So is it structured, or suggested, or just organic?
I'll just tell you, first of all, Antiochian Men is only 3.5 years old, if that. So we're still in our infancy developing, but we've talked about developing things like this. I'll tell you that we don't want to make things so regimented and programmatic that it becomes a cookie cutter expectation, because all of us as men have been given a creative force within us by God, and we want to unlock that creativity. In every parish, every church is different. This church is going to be different than Springdale, Arkansas, or in Naples, Florida. There's different needs that come from the churches. There's a different demographic and age makeup of the parish. So what we found is, let's just let each parish establish leadership and do what's right for their parish. It may look like what you just described, and that is not unique. There's other parishes that have smaller groups that have formed to help each other with accountability and specific issues. But guys, that's the reason why we have these bubbles, right? Because not everything is going to necessarily work for everybody, and there are people that have different struggles too. Some people may need to unplug a little bit more. Some people may need more connection, right? So the idea of what Father Hans said is, when we masturbate, right, we're dissipating our creative energy. If we pour that into creating what's right for our local brotherhood, you all will know what the right decision is, right, for your parish. And I can't come in as the president of Antiochian Men and make an edict and tell you what's right for your parish. See, you know your parish better than anyone. And so these examples that you're talking about, yes, we're looking at potentially putting suggestions, but the idea of Antiochian Men is that it should meet a much more wider array of challenges that men are facing, because it's wide. And if we bring it too focused, then we're taking out the potential of other areas that could be addressed, where honestly we're learning from parish to parish. We're learning how to improve on what we're doing all the time. So we do hope to develop something that is a little bit more programmatic, but we're also not going to rush to do something before we've learned enough to know what we're talking about. And we found out from our experience with all the different parishes, the challenges are so diverse. What we need is a strong leader, and I know you have a great leader here with Eric, to help work with the parish priest to identify what are those local solutions, and what you just brought up is a great local success and solution that is happening in other parishes. We want to bring attention to those. So share the successes that you all have in this parish with us, so that other parishes can do similar things if it's right for them. But again, it won't be forced. It'll have to make sense for that parish context.
I tremble for the fearful day of judgment, but trusting the compassion of thy mercy, I shout to thee like David, have mercy upon me, O God, according to thy grace.